calm, like nothing. Every evening, when the tall buildings of downtown began to empty out and the streets filled with the soft sounds of people heading home, he arrived quietly. His work didn't draw attention. No one cheered when he came in, and no one noticed when he left. But he didn't mind. He was used to being the man who came in after everyone else, the man who made things clean and fresh again for the morning. He worked for a cleaning company that handled several offices in the city. Every night he visited 3 or 4 places. One of them was a marketing firm on the 12th floor of an old glass building. It wasn't a big office, but it looked fancy compared to the others he cleaned. The smell of coffee always lingered in the air, and the desks were covered in sticky notes, papers, and coffee mugs. That's where he first noticed her. She was always the last person to leave. While others rushed out by 6, she stayed late, typing fast, flipping through documents, sometimes just sitting with her head in her hands. She had the look of someone trying to hold too many things together at once. He didn't know her name at first. He didn't ask. He just noticed her rhythm. Some nights she'd leave early. Some nights she'd stay until nearly midnight. But no matter how tired she looked, she always smiled politely when she saw him. "Evening," she would say softly, packing her bag. He would nod. "Evening, ma'am," that was it. Just a few words, nothing more. But somehow those small exchanges stuck with him. He had been doing this job for almost 7 years. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. He took pride in what he did, polishing desks until they shone, mopping floors until they gleamed under the lights. When he was done, he liked standing at the door for a moment, looking back at the room. It gave him a quiet satisfaction, knowing that when people came in the next morning, they'd find everything neat and ready. His co-workers used to joke that he was too serious about cleaning. But he didn't care. He'd grown up believing that any job, done with heart, had dignity. One evening he came in later than usual because of traffic. The office was almost empty except for her. She was sitting at her desk, a small desk lamp glowing beside her. The rest of the room was dark. When he started vacuuming near her desk, she looked up and smiled. "You always make this place look brand new," she said kindly. He paused for a moment, unsure what to say. "Just doing my job, ma'am." "No, really," she said, leaning back in her chair. "I've worked in a lot of places before, and none of them ever looked this clean." "You must really care about what you do." He looked down, feeling shy. "Well, I guess I do. My mom always said if you're going to do something, do it right." She smiled again. "Sounds like your mom was smart." That was the first real conversation they had. It wasn't long, but it was enough to stay with him the rest of the night. After that evening, things changed a little. When she stayed late, she'd talk to him sometimes. Small talk mostly. About work. About how cold it was outside or how she couldn't wait for the weekend. He learned that she was new in town, that she had just started this job a few months ago, and that she often stayed late because she was trying to prove herself. He didn't tell her much about himself. He was quiet by nature, and besides, no one ever really asked. But one night, when she offered him a cup of coffee while he was cleaning the conference room, something shifted. "Do you ever sit down during your shift?" she asked. He chuckled. "If I did, I might not get back up." She laughed softly. "Fair enough. But still, you deserve a break." She handed him a cup of coffee, black, no sugar. He thanked her and sat down for the first time in that office. The conversation that followed was simple but warm. She told him about her childhood in a small town, about how she'd moved to the city to chase her dream job. He listened quietly, occasionally smiling or nodding. When she asked about him, he hesitated. Then he told her a little about his family back home, about how his father had passed away when he was young, and how his mother worked 2 jobs to raise him and his brothers. "I guess I just try to make her proud," he said softly. She looked at him for a moment, her eyes kind. "I think she would be." From that night on, their small talks became a quiet part of his routine. It wasn't anything romantic or strange, just 2 people who crossed paths in the quiet hours, finding small comfort in each other's company. Some nights, he'd walk in and she'd already have a cup of coffee waiting for him. Other nights, she'd ask about his day or tell him about a client who drove her crazy. He liked those moments. It made the long hours feel lighter. But one night, something felt different. He noticed it the moment he walked in. The office lights were dim, and she was sitting by the window staring out at the city below. The glow of the streetlights reflected off the glass, making her look almost like part of the skyline. "You okay?" he asked gently, setting down his cleaning cart. She turned, startled, then gave a tired smile. Just a long day, he nodded. You want me to start on the other side so I don't bother you? She shook her head. No, you're fine. Honestly, it's nice when you're around. Makes the place feel less empty. He smiled slightly, unsure how to respond. As he vacuumed, she spoke again. You ever feel like you're working so hard but going nowhere? He turned off the machine and looked at her. Yeah, he said. All the time. But I guess I just try to keep moving anyway. Feels better than stopping. She watched him quietly for a moment, then nodded. You always seem so bothers you, he shrugged. I just try to keep my peace. Life's loud enough. Something about that answer made her smile. Not the usual polite one, but a real soft smile. You're wiser than you let on, she said. He laughed a little. I don't know about that. There was a pause, the kind that feels easy instead of awkward. The clock ticked quietly. Outside, the rain had started falling, tapping against the windows. Inside, the room felt still and safe. When he finished cleaning, he packed up his supplies and looked around one last time. Everything shone, the desks, the glass, the floors. He was about to say goodnight when she spoke again. Hey, she said softly, standing up. Thank you for always taking care of this place. And for listening even when I ramble, he smiled. You don't ramble. She stepped closer just a little. Most people don't even notice me, but you see things, not just messes, but people. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to being noticed himself. He nodded slowly. Maybe that's 'cause I know what it's like not to be seen. There was a silence after that, gentle, not uncomfortable. Just two people standing in the soft hum of an office at night, both realizing that maybe kindness doesn't need an audience. She gave a small smile. See you tomorrow night? He nodded. Yeah, same time. When he left that night, the rain had stopped. The streets glistened under the streetlights. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a quiet warmth in his chest, the kind that doesn't come from coffee or comfort, but from being seen, even for a moment. He didn't know what the next days would bring, but for the first time, he looked forward to work, not for the cleaning, not for the paycheck, but for that simple exchange of kindness that made the night feel lighter. And though neither of them said it out loud, something had already begun, something gentle and real, hidden in those quiet moments between mops and paperwork, between her late hours and his silent routine. The next evening he arrived as usual, the same 12th floor, the same quiet hallways and the same familiar scent of coffee that clung to the air. But that night felt different somehow. Maybe it was the way the memory of their last conversation kept replaying in his mind, or maybe it was the way he caught himself checking the time, wondering if she'd still be there when he came in. When the elevator doors opened, he could already hear soft music playing from the office. That was new. He walked in, pushing his cart quietly as always, and there she was, sitting at her desk, her laptop open, her foot tapping lightly to the rhythm of an old jazz tune. She looked up when she heard him and smiled. Evening, she said, her voice light. Evening, he replied, setting his supplies by the wall. You like jazz? She asked. He thought for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, my mom used to play it on Sundays while she cleaned. Said it made the work feel lighter. She smiled wider. Guess we've got that in common. Music makes the long hours feel shorter. For a while he worked quietly while she typed. The music filled the silence between them, soft and easy. Every now and then she'd glance up at him as if she wanted to say something but couldn't quite find the words. Around 9, she finally stood and stretched, letting out a tired sigh. I swear this job is going to give me gray hair, she said with a little laugh. He chuckled. Could be worse. At least you've got a window view. True, she said, walking over to the big window that overlooked the city. But sometimes I look out there and feel like I'm missing out. Everyone's out living and I'm just here staring at screens. He leaned on his mop handle and looked out too. The city lights shimmered like tiny stars scattered across the streets below. Maybe that's life, he said softly. We all think someone else's world looks better than ours. She turned to look at him. You ever feel that way? He hesitated. Sometimes. But I learned to be thankful for what I got. Even small things, like having a job to go to, or meeting people who make the nights a little easier. Her expression softened at that. You have a good heart, she said quietly. You see things most people don't. He didn't know how to respond, so he just smiled a little and went back to his work. Over the next few weeks, their small talks became part of both their routines. She'd order extra coffee and leave one on the counter for him. He'd fix her desk chair when it wobbled or tighten the loose handle on the office door. Sometimes they'd talk about movies, sometimes about their families. Sometimes they'd just sit quietly, letting the silence feel like company. One night he came in and found her crying softly at her desk. Her back was turned and she quickly wiped her eyes when she heard him come in. "Hey," he said gently. "You okay?" She nodded too quickly. "Yeah, I'm fine, just rough day." He didn't push, but he could tell she wasn't fine. Her voice shook a little when she tried to speak again. "Sometimes I feel like I'm not good enough," she whispered. "Like no matter how hard I work, it's never enough for anyone." He set his mop aside and walked closer, but not too close. "You're doing your best," he said softly. "That's all anyone can do." She looked up at him, her eyes still wet. "You really think so?" "I know so," he said. "You show up even when it's hard." "That says something." She smiled faintly. "You always know what to say." He shrugged. "I just say what I believe." That night she stayed while he cleaned, and for the first time she didn't look so weighed down. When he was done, she said thank you, not just for cleaning, but for listening. And for the first time he realized how much those small moments mattered to her. After that, they grew a little closer. She started timing her schedule, so she'd still be there when he came in. He noticed the way she left her desk light on a little longer, or how she'd ask about his day even when she was clearly tired. Sometimes, they'd share snacks she brought from home, cookies, fruit, or leftover pasta in a container. He never asked for it, but she always offered, saying, "You've been working all night. You should eat something." He appreciated that more than she probably knew, but he also started feeling something else, something he couldn't quite explain. It wasn't romantic exactly. It was respect, admiration, and a kind of quiet connection he hadn't felt in years. He looked forward to seeing her, not because he wanted anything from her, but because she made him feel seen. One night, she asked him about his dreams. "If you could do anything," she said, "what would it be?" He thought for a long time before answering. "I used to want to be an artist," he said slowly. "I liked drawing when I was younger. But life got busy. Bills come first. Do you still draw?" she asked. He smiled a little. "Sometimes. Mostly for my nephew. He loves superheroes. Says I make them look real." She leaned forward, curious. "You should show me sometime," he laughed. "Maybe one day." That night he went home and actually dug out his old sketchbook. The pages were worn and yellowed, but the drawings still carried a piece of him, a part he had almost forgotten. He smiled, thinking about how she'd asked. No one had ever cared to know before. The next evening, he brought the sketchbook with him. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he just wanted to share something real. When she noticed it, she smiled. "Is that it? The famous sketchbook?" He nodded shyly. "Yeah, but it's nothing special." "Let me see," she said softly. He hesitated, then handed it to her. She flipped through the pages slowly, her eyes lighting up. "These are amazing," she said. "You're really talented." He looked down, a little embarrassed. "Thank you." She looked up at him. "You ever think about doing this for a living?" He shook his head. "Nah, people don't pay for dreams where I'm from. They pay for hard work." She paused for a moment. "Maybe, but sometimes dreams are worth chasing too." That stuck with him for days. Her words echoed in his head while he mopped floors and wiped desks. Maybe dreams were worth chasing. Maybe it wasn't too late to start again. But deep down, he also knew his life wasn't as simple as just following a dream. He had responsibilities, family who depended on him, bills that didn't stop coming. Still, the thought of his art, the part of himself he had buried, began to feel alive again. As winter came, the office grew colder, and the nights longer. She started bringing him hot tea instead of coffee. They laughed more often. Some nights they'd talk about everything and nothing. Stories from their childhoods, old songs, random memories that made them smile. One night the power flickered off for a moment during a rainstorm. They both laughed nervously when the lights went out, sitting together in the glow of her desk lamp. "Guess we're stuck with candlelight," she joked. He grinned. "Could be worse?" For a moment there was just the sound of rain against the windows and the hum of the emergency lights. It felt like the rest of the world had gone quiet. She looked at him then, a thoughtful look in her eyes. "You know," she said softly, "you've become part of this place. I don't think this office would feel right without you. He chuckled. It's just cleaning. No, she said, shaking her head. It's more than that. You make it peaceful. You make it feel cared for. He didn't know what to say. He wasn't used to praise, especially from someone like her. But hearing it warmed him more than he expected. When the lights finally came back on, she smiled and said, See? You brought the light back, he laughed. Nah, that was the generator. But deep down, he knew that night would stay with him. The next few weeks went by quietly but comfortably. Their friendship had become something steady, something that both of them looked forward to. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was simple, honest, the kind of connection that grows quietly and stays. He still came in every night, still cleaned the floors, still left before dawn, but now there was a reason those nights didn't feel so lonely. And though neither of them said it out loud, they both felt it, something gentle building between them, rooted in respect and kindness. She had once told him that life was about taking chances. He didn't think much of it then, but as he stood one night looking at her across that softly lit office, he began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, some chances were worth taking. And in her eyes, he saw something too, a quiet understanding that whatever they were building, it mattered. It didn't need a name, yet the days kept passing, one evening blending into the next. The rhythm of their lives stayed steady, his quiet work, her long hours, and the comfort of their short talks in between. It had become something they both counted on, though neither of them ever said it aloud. He never told her, but there were nights he arrived early on purpose. He'd sit in the lobby for a few minutes, pretending to check his phone, waiting until he knew she'd still be upstairs. There was something about seeing her there that made the night feel lighter, and for her those late hours didn't feel so lonely anymore. Knowing he'd eventually walk through the door, pushing that same cart with his quiet smile, gave her a kind of peace she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something real, something built from the kind of respect and kindness that most people overlook. One night, near the end of December, she stayed later than usual. The city was decorated for the holidays, lights twinkling outside the windows, the streets below filled with the sounds of people rushing home with shopping bags and laughter. He walked in carrying a small thermos of hot cocoa. It wasn't fancy, just something he'd made at home. When she saw it, she grinned. You brought your own drink tonight? He nodded. Yeah, figured it's too cold for plain coffee. She leaned back in her chair. You know what? That actually sounds good. He hesitated for a moment, then offered her some from the thermos. She took a sip and smiled. Wow, this is really good, he smiled shyly. Secret recipe. My mom used to make it when we couldn't afford gifts. Said sweetness can make up for anything. She nodded thoughtfully. She sounds like she was a good woman. She was, he said softly. Still is. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The glow from the city lights flickered across her face, and for a moment, he thought about how strange it was that two people from such different worlds could end up sharing the same quiet space, night after night. You ever go home for Christmas? She asked suddenly. He shook his head. Not much these days. My family's back in the South. Long drive, and I usually can't take time off. She frowned slightly. That's a shame. You deserve a break too, he smiled a little. Maybe one day. The conversation drifted into stories about holidays past. She told him about the time she accidentally burned a turkey, and how her dad tried to eat it anyway, pretending it was fine. He laughed at that, the sound warm and genuine. When midnight came, she looked at her watch and sighed. Guess I should call it a night. He nodded. Yeah, I should finish up too. But just as he was packing up, she said softly, Hey, wait. He turned around. I got something for you, she said, rummaging through her bag.
She pulled out a small box wrapped in plain paper.
It's nothing big, but I wanted to say thank you. For being so kind, for just being here. He looked surprised. You didn't have to do that. I know, she said with a smile. But I wanted to. He opened it carefully. Inside was a simple sketchbook, brand new, with thick white pages. There was a note tucked inside that read, Keep drawing. The world needs more of what you see. For a moment, he couldn't say anything. He just looked at the book, then at her. Thank you, he said quietly. I don't know what to say. Just promise me you'll use it, she said softly. I will, he said, and he meant it. That night, when he got home, He sat at his small kitchen table and opened the sketchbook. He didn't even think, he just started drawing. His hands moved on their own, the pencil gliding across the page. When he looked down, he realized he had drawn the office, the desk, the window, and a small figure sitting under the warm light. Her. He smiled to himself and kept drawing. For the first time in years, he felt like himself again. The next few weeks were filled with quiet moments like that, simple, genuine, and full of meaning. She brought him new pens for his drawings. He fixed the broken light near her desk. They'd share stories about their families, their struggles, their little victories. Then came the night everything changed. It was late January, and the city was covered in snow. The streets were slick, the air biting cold. Most offices had closed early, but she stayed behind again. He almost didn't come that night, the roads were bad, but something told him he should. When he arrived, the building was nearly empty. He pushed his cart through the hall and noticed her light still on. But when he walked in, she wasn't at her desk. Her coat was draped over her chair, her bag still open. He looked around, a bit concerned. Then he heard a soft sound from the hallway, a faint cough. He walked over and found her sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, clutching her ankle. "What happened?" he asked quickly, setting down his mop. She gave a small laugh, trying to hide the pain. "I slipped in the hallway. Guess heels and snow don't mix." He knelt beside her carefully. "Can you stand?" She shook her head. "It hurts too much." Without a word, he offered his hand. "Come on, I'll help you up." She hesitated for a second, then took his hand. His grip was firm but gentle. He helped her to her feet, steadying her as she winced. "Easy," he said softly. "Just lean on me." She nodded, her hand resting lightly on his arm. They moved slowly back into the office. He pulled out a chair for her, then ran to get some ice from the small break-room freezer. When he came back, she was smiling faintly. "You didn't have to go through all that trouble," he shrugged. "You'd do the same." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "Yeah, I guess I would." He crouched down to hand her the ice pack, and for a moment their eyes met. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't forced. It was one of those quiet moments that feels like time stops for a second. She smiled. "You're really something, you know that?" He laughed lightly. "I'm just doing what's right." "Most people wouldn't even notice," she said. "You always notice." He didn't know what to say. He just gave a small nod and looked away, trying to hide the warmth rising in his chest. For the rest of the night, he stayed longer than usual, making sure she was okay. They talked for hours, about life, about how people cross paths for reasons they don't always understand. When she finally stood to leave, she said softly, "I don't know what I'd do without you here." He smiled. "You'd be fine. You're stronger than you think." She shook her head. "Still, thank you. For tonight. For everything." After she left, he sat for a while thinking about her words. He wasn't sure why, but they meant more than he wanted to admit. Over the next few weeks, things between them grew even warmer. She started bringing him dinner sometimes, saying she cooked too much. He started showing her his sketches during breaks. She'd flip through them like they were something precious. "You could sell these," she said one night. "I'm serious. People would love them." He smiled. Maybe someday. But he started to think about it more seriously. He began to believe in himself again, and a big part of that was because she believed first. Their friendship had become something special, quiet, but full of meaning. Every word they shared seemed to build another layer of trust between them. Then one night, near the end of winter, as he was finishing up cleaning, she said something that caught him off guard. "Do you ever think about how strange it is?" she asked, standing near the window. "You and me. Two people from completely different worlds meeting here at this time." He smiled. "Maybe it's not strange. Maybe it's supposed to happen that way." She turned to him, her voice softer now. "Do you think we could start right here?" He looked at her, unsure what she meant at first. But the sincerity in her eyes said everything. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, his heart beating faster than it had in a long time. Finally, he said quietly, "Maybe we already did." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Like two people who didn't need to say more to understand what was happening. That night, when he left the office, the snow had stopped falling. The streets were calm and the air felt fresh. He looked back at the building once before walking away, knowing deep down that something important had begun inside those quiet walls. It wasn't about love yet. It wasn't about grand gestures or big words. It was about connection. Two souls finding comfort in a world that often forgets to see people for who they really are. And though he didn't know what would happen next, he felt something new stirring in his heart, a hope that maybe, for once, life was leading him somewhere good. The days after that night felt different, not just for him but for her too. There was something new in the air now, something unspoken but present, like a quiet rhythm between them that both could feel but neither dared to name. When he came in each evening, he tried to act the same to keep things normal, but every time she smiled at him, it stirred something deep inside, something gentle, hopeful, and almost frightening in how real it felt. She had changed too. There was a lightness in her that hadn't been there before. Her laughter came easier, her words softer. Even the office seemed different now, warmer somehow, like the cold white walls had soaked up their conversations and kept them safe. One evening, she brought him a small box. "Open it," she said, smiling. Inside was a set of pencils, art pencils, different shades and thicknesses, the kind real artists use. He looked up, speechless. "These are expensive," he said. She shrugged. "You deserve them. You said you wanted to start drawing again." He smiled quietly, turning the box over in his hands. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she said softly. "You inspire me, you know." He blinked, surprised. "Me?" "Yes, you," she said, laughing a little. "You work harder than anyone I know. You stay humble. You care about people. That's rare." He didn't know what to say to that. Compliments still caught him off guard. He had spent most of his life invisible, doing jobs that no one noticed unless something went wrong. But here was someone who saw him, not for what he did, but for who he was. That night after she left, he sat for a moment by the window, looking out at the city lights. He thought about all the nights he had walked these halls, cleaning up after people who never learned his name. And now here he was, feeling seen, appreciated, even cared for. It was a feeling he didn't take lightly. Over the next few weeks, their connection deepened in small, quiet ways. She started showing him her projects, asking for his thoughts on her designs. He was no marketing expert, but she said his perspective helped her see things differently. "Sometimes," she told him one night, "you notice details I completely miss. It's like you see the world in layers." He smiled shyly. "Maybe that's from cleaning up after everyone. You start to notice what people leave behind." She laughed softly. "Maybe that's your secret superpower." He grinned. "I'll take that." The more they talked, the more they learned about each other, their childhoods, their fears, their dreams. She told him how she'd grown up feeling like she always had to prove herself, how success had become her shield against loneliness. He shared how he'd learned to find peace in small things, because life hadn't given him much of the big ones. They came from different worlds, but somehow their truths met in the middle. Then one evening, she came into the office looking tired, her shoulders slumped, her face pale. He noticed right away. "You okay?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "Rough day. I think I made a mistake on a big client project." He could see how hard she was on herself. "Everyone makes mistakes," he said softly. "Yeah, but not everyone gets second chances," she muttered. He thought for a moment, then said quietly, "Maybe the right people give them to you. Maybe you just haven't met enough of those." That made her smile, just a little. "You always know what to say." "I just tell the truth," he said. She looked at him for a long moment before turning back to her desk. Something in her expression that night stayed with him, something tender and uncertain, like she was seeing him in a new way. A week later, she came into the office early in the evening, holding something behind her back. "Close your eyes," she said. He laughed. "What is it?" "Just do it." He sighed but obeyed. "Okay, open them." When he did, he saw a small framed picture sitting on the desk. It was one of his sketches, one he had shown her weeks ago, the one he drew of the office with her sitting by the window. She had printed and framed it. "I had it scanned at the print shop," she said, smiling shyly. "It's beautiful. I wanted to hang it here." He just stared for a moment, his throat tight. "You really didn't have to do that." "I know," she said softly. "But I wanted to remind you that what you do matters. You make things better even when you don't realize it." For a long time, neither of them spoke. It was one of those rare moments where words couldn't do justice to what was being felt. After that night, their bond grew deeper, but so did the questions that neither of them dared to ask. What were they to each? Other friends? Something more? Was it even possible for two people from such different paths to meet in the middle? He tried not to think too much about it. He just focused on the moments they shared, the laughter, the talks, the quiet understanding that made his nights feel less lonely. But sometimes, when he'd catch her looking at him across the office, there was something in her eyes he couldn't ignore, a softness, a question, maybe even a hope. One rainy night, she asked him a question that caught him off guard. "Do you ever wish your life had gone differently?" she asked. He thought for a while before answering. "Sometimes. But if it had, I might not be here now," she tilted her head. "And would that be a bad thing?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah, I think it would." She didn't say anything after that, but her eyes said enough. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping softly against the windows. They sat in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Then she spoke again, her voice quieter. "You know, before you came along, I used to hate working late. The office always felt so cold. But now it feels like a place I want to be." He looked at her, surprised by how honest she sounded. She smiled gently. "You make this place feel alive." He didn't know what to say. His heart beat fast, and for a moment, the whole world outside that small office disappeared. But before he could respond, her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was a call from her manager about the project she'd been stressed about. She answered quickly, her tone changing to professional calm, and he stepped back, giving her space. When she hung up, she sighed with relief. "Crisis averted." "I fixed it," he smiled. "Told you you'd be fine," she grinned back. "Maybe I just needed my good luck charm around," he laughed. "Good luck charm? That's new." "Don't deny it," she teased. "Every time you're here, things go right." He shook his head, smiling. "Guess I'll take the credit then." As the night wore on, the city lights glowed brighter against the rain. He finished cleaning and packed up his things. Before he left, she called out softly, "Hey." He turned. "Thank you for everything," she said. "You've changed how I see people, how I see myself too." He smiled quietly. "You've done the same for me." She hesitated for a moment, like she wanted to say more but didn't. Instead, she just smiled and said, "See you tomorrow night." He nodded. Same time. That night, as he walked home through the rain, he couldn't stop thinking about her words. He realized how much she had come to mean to him, not because of her kindness alone, but because she had seen him when the world didn't bother to look. He thought about the way she listened, the way she believed in him, and the way her smile lingered even after he'd gone. For the first time in a long while, he felt like his life was heading somewhere he hadn't planned, but somewhere good. The next few days passed with the same quiet rhythm. But one evening when he arrived, the office lights were off. Her desk was empty. At first, he thought she had just left early. But then he noticed an envelope sitting on her chair with his name written on it. He stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a short note. "They offered me a position in another city. I couldn't say no. But please know this. You've made a bigger difference in my life than you'll ever know. Thank you for reminding me what real kindness looks like." He read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. He sat there for a while, the empty office around him feeling heavier than ever. It was strange, how one person's presence could fill a room, and how quickly that same space could feel hollow when they were gone. He walked to the window and looked out at the city below. The lights flickered just like always, but they didn't feel as bright tonight. Still, he smiled softly to himself. Maybe she was right. Maybe some people meet for a reason, even if their paths don't last forever, and maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of their story, just the pause before something new. Weeks passed since the night he found her note. The office didn't feel the same anymore. The lights still hummed softly. The floors still shone after his mop passed over them, but the quiet felt heavier now. Every corner carried a memory, her laughter, her soft footsteps, the way she'd stay late just to talk a little longer. He told himself he'd get used to it. Life had taught him how to adjust when things changed, how to keep moving even when something good slipped away. But some nights, as he cleaned her old desk, he found himself glancing at the door, half expecting her to walk in with that easy smile and say, "Hey, you're here early tonight." But she didn't. Still, he never threw the note away. It stayed folded neatly in his wallet, a small reminder of something that had made his world feel bigger for a while.